All right. Welcome everyone to the Dynamo Space Camp. Thanks for joining this morning, or I guess late afternoon for some of our European friends. So meanwhile, you can type in the chat of the session where you are watching from. And yeah, excited to be here with all of you. So let me bring on the slides. You can all see the slides right now, right? Yes. All right. Let's get started. We're ready. So, what is the Dynamo Space Camp? I almost called it the Dynamo Boot Camp. That felt a bit boring. And to me, Dynamo, when you get started with it, when you start automating tasks, uh, it's quite a magical feeling. Tasks that used to take hours to complete can be done within a few minutes. And that has an almost magical feeling when you get started with it. So I thought that the idea of the Space Camp made it more exciting and captured that feeling of automation. And I just thought it sounded cool as well, the Dynamo Space Camp. So meanwhile, if you're watching, you can keep your camera closed. You can also keep it open. It's nice to see the face of people watching, but it's totally up to you. Of course, not forcing anyone to do anything. The list of episodes during this series, we have 3 of them. The first is right now, we'll learn the key Dynamo principles. On the second session, Automation Supernova, that's on Wednesday, we'll learn to start to automate lots of Revit tedious tasks. We'll explore using Excel with Dynamo. We'll work with model groups. We'll change any parameters of any elements. And I will use real case studies of scripts that I've created in my career that actually help, and some of them that are part of the BIMPure as well. In the final session, which is next week, so next Monday, it's called the Parametric Frontier. So the goal in this one is to explore parametric design. We'll start to generate geometry and place family instance at specific spots. So typically, working with data with Dynamo, it's relatively simple. So it can be learned quite quickly. The moment that you start working with geometry, generating elements and modifying geometry, it's a bit more complex, but we'll start to tackle it, at least give you the basics in the final session. All replays will be available after the session. You will receive the link to watch the replays, but receive all the Dynamo scripts as well. And we have a couple of challenges that you'll be able to use. So why use Dynamo? What's the point of Dynamo in the first place? I would be curious in the chat, you can tell if you do have some Dynamo experience or if it's the first time you ever use it. So you can type and let us know your thoughts about it. So why Dynamo? Well, first, something that is important to learn. There are 3 different ways to work with the Revit API to automate tasks. There is Dynamo, Python, and C#. Let me explain the difference between the 3. The most simple is by far Dynamo. That's the one I personally started with. And I feel the barrier for entry for Dynamo is much smaller than for Python or C#. All right, just give me a sec here. Okay, yeah. And but with Python, this one in the center, it can be a somewhat less steep learning curve than C#. C# is the most complex, but if you want to create an actual Revit add-in that you can install with an installer, that's the way you would go. But I feel that being a programmer is much more difficult, a much bigger learning curve, and although you can get farther, starting with Dynamo is a much better first step. If you're interested in working with Python and using PyRevit to download, develop your own custom Revit toolbar, we have a course in the BIMPure membership. So in theory, everyone here is part of the BIMPure membership, so you do have access to this mini course with Eric Fritz. So I would recommend those start with Dynamo, and when you get comfortable, you want to get to the next step. Trying this out with Python and PyRevit is a great way to go afterwards. So why Dynamo? Why do I enjoy Dynamo so much despite some of the limitations? Well, I got to be honest, I am not a programming expert. I barely know Python. I know a little bit of it. I don't know C# at all. So I'm not a coder. I'm not a programmer. But I still use Dynamo a lot. I love to automate tasks. And Dynamo is a great gateway to the world of automation. And many people in their journey from to automation, even some of them that are pro C# coders that develop Revit plugins, many of them started with Dynamo. And then they went down that route. Some of them went to Python and then maybe C#. Some of them went from Dynamo to C#. But the first step in lots of people in AEC is Dynamo. It's great to get started because let's face it, I know. So I wonder what's the percentage of architects versus engineers or other disciplines. But I know personally, I am very visual. And having this visual programming interface, it helps a lot to get started. While Python and C#, it can be very intimidating. Also, what I call prototyping with Dynamo is a great way to get started, right? So if you want to try a code automation idea, doing so with Dynamo is a great way to do it. Also, an important point is, look, I am not a programmer. I don't want to be a programmer. I like doing modeling. I like to do BIM manager stuff. And being a programmer, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time to learn. And I feel it can almost be a full-time job. You know, it's rare that he's someone who's kind of a part-time C# coder because it's such a rare skill. It's such in high demand that it often becomes a full-time job. Right? And personally, that's not my interest. I like doing BIM stuff. I like doing modeling. I like doing architecture. So I like the fact that with Dynamo, it's more of a part-time job. It's just one extra skill that I have in my toolbox, more so than just my full-time job to automate, right? So that's the way I see it personally, and why I recommend Dynamo for people who haven't worked with the Revit API yet. Let's talk about some of the limits and downsides of Dynamo. Managing Dynamo can be complex. We'll show Dynamo later on. I'll show you some of the limitations. You have inconsistent custom packages, which are nodes created by users, which are great, but it's a bit difficult to manage. There are differences between the different versions of Dynamo. So if you create a script in a recent version of Revit and you try to script an older version, it's likely to not work. In the other way around, a very old script, there's a lot of chances it will not work in more recent versions of Dynamo, and especially if you're using custom packages. Also, it can have some confusion among users. If you try to deploy Dynamo to your team, you might face some limitations. You have extra steps that you need to ask your users to complete, such as installing multiple custom packages and so on. So if you work in a big firm and there's a coder in your firm that knows C#, having your own custom tool can work great. Or it can be someone who knows Python and might use custom PyRevit tools. That's another way to go. And with PyRevit, with the advance of AI, creating your own custom tools using code, the barrier to entry is not as big now. AI can help a lot generating some code. But still, despite all of these flaws and counterpoints, I still think that Dynamo is an amazing stepping stone into the world of automation. And being a coder is a full-time endeavor, while Dynamo is easier as a part-time job. Let me talk about some of the technical limits of Dynamo. First, a script that works in English might not work in other languages. I'm in Quebec. I work with clients in French. I work with clients in English. And often the script in English won't work in French or vice versa, right? So sometimes we have to create a version of the script in French, another in English, or sometimes there are workarounds where you can try to build a bilingual script. And same thing for units. So if you have a script that works well in Imperial, it might not work in metric. It depends. If you are not using values in your script, you might be fine. But the moment you start to multiply by inches or millimeters, you might need some switches to flip between the different units. So that's just an extra thing to work around. Okay, so now I want to show you examples of Dynamo scripts, like scripts that I've built along the years. So these are real cases that I've used for myself at the old firm I used to work at as an architect and BIM manager, or with some of my clients that we've developed. So let me click here. So we have the GIF. So this one is quite cool. That's to automatically create legends. Creating legends can be extremely boring. You have to manually bring in the legend components and fill out everything, right? And often these elements are not linked to the actual composition of the roofs or the walls. right? But this script, it acquires, it searches into the compound elements for every single layer, finds the thickness, and writes it down, search for the material. And this is a generic annotation family that is automatically filled up by Dynamo. The only thing that you need to fill in this case is you see that D3 value, that's the roof type mark. So only with that, Dynamo has enough information to pick everything that it needs and fill it up. It gives a total thickness and yeah, everything that you need to know. So that's a script that I did create for a client. You can create on a one-by-one basis for each single composition, or you can generate every single wall type that exists in the project, for example. And again, for this client, they were spending the hours doing this stuff. And so that's hundreds of hours of tedious, boring work saved. Another one is, for example, renumbering doors. That's a script that we'll explore in the next episodes on Wednesday, in fact. You can see that this door, we want them to match the room's number. So the room is 104. We'll have doors 104-A and 104-B. That's possible with Dynamo. That was a request from a client that asked if we can colorize the revision clouds based on the revision number. So revision number 1, the clouds would be red, revision number 2, they would be green, and so on. Again, possible with Dynamo. This one is with model groups. I've been working a lot with the modular industry in the last couple of years, and doing modular projects, wanted to have a schedule that included every single element in a module, and the modules were placed inside of model groups. In this case, we were able to acquire the type name of the group and push this information to every single element inside of the group, and afterwards use it in scheduling. Again, all done by using Dynamo. This one was under request from a client that wanted, how is that called? Spatial separation, where you have the property line and the distance to the wall. And with this distance, you know how much percentage of opening you're allowed to have. So this script will calculate how many openings you have and push it to a schedule. And if the actual percentage of opening exceeded the maximum allowed by the building code, the cell turned red. So in this case, it was a mix of playing with schedules, but the Dynamo script did most of the lifting here. It acquired every opening in the wall and pushed the values to this schedule. Another one, this one we're working with Excel. So this is an Excel spreadsheet, and we have the room number, the room name, and even the area required. So that's to verify if we're following the code. So in this case, these rooms are created automatically in Revit. Again, that's one we'll see next week. All right, in the final episode, number 3, we'll explore parametric design. Some of you might be familiar with Grasshopper. It's still the best tool if you want to work with complex facades, but Dynamo can do some of it. And actually, I wanted to end the case studies, examples of some of the scripts with this cool projects that I think I did 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, it was 3 years ago. I did a script where we create a 3D brick pattern with prototyping headers based on an image gradient map. And you can see on the left, that's the Enscape rendering that we did a few years ago. And now, just a couple of weeks ago, I received these pictures where you can see that the building's almost complete, and you can see the effect looks a bit more subtle on the actual pictures, but you can see some brick with a 3D pattern. That was done using Dynamo. In this case, in fact, you can see that's a curtain wall element, and each current panels include 2 bricks, and we're able to map this gradient image to create this kind of 3D effect. So I really like this one because it's not as boring, which is fine. Look, boring is, you need it sometimes, but just moving data around, playing with the mark. This one was actually used for 3D geometry, was used to complete this building. I think it looks pretty good. And give me a sec here. Okay. In fact, I do have a final one. I'm also working a lot with the wood industry, and by using Dynamo, we were able to automatically generate the wall framing, including the headers, all the studs, and so on, by placing these wood families. I will say in this case that this script was getting pretty heavy. We pretty much reached the limits of Dynamo. The script took about 1 minute to create, And I'm now collaborating with a programmer on my team to convert this Dynamo script to a C# add-in, which is much faster and much easier. So sometimes you see in this one, we kind of reached the limits of Dynamo. It did work, but it was starting to be a bit fragile and a bit complex to modify. Okay, let's have a quick glance at the questions. People are asking if about Grasshopper. Yes, you need a Rhino license. I'll talk more about it in the final session. So personally, I've used Rhino a little bit, Grasshopper a little bit as well, but it's been a long time. I don't have a Rhino license. So using Dynamo for the facade work made sense in my case, even if Grasshopper is known for being a better tool for this kind of job. Okay, so we're soon getting to the part where we'll open and play with Dynamo. Don't worry, I just wanted to introduce what you can do with it and the limitations. All right, let's keep going. So what should you automate? I'm asking you this question. You can start brainstorming on it. So to help you out with that, you can ask yourself, in the last week, what task did I spend a copious amount of time doing? Especially the really kind of boring, tedious, repetitive tasks. Can you describe all the steps to accomplish a task? And do you think you can automate it with Dynamo? So if you can describe in a series of very simple steps, especially if it involves data, find all walls with type command X, get the height, and multiply by 0.6. In this case, it can probably be automated with Dynamo. Not everything can, for sure. But if you can find such task in your job and invite you to think carefully about it, probably you can start to automate it with Dynamo. And I recommend starting with data and parameters, working with geometry, generating geometry or modifying. We'll talk about it in the final session, but it's an extra step of complexity. And you'll see today we'll talk about just moving data around and how easy it can be. Let's talk a little bit about AI. That's kind of a new chapter that new information that I added compared to my initial Dynamo course. And so I get a lot of questions, is ChatGPT a good tool for Dynamo or I guess Claude or other LLMs? The answer is it depends. I would say it's definitely worth trying. I do try to use ChatGPT for my Dynamo work, and sometimes it nails it. It just gives me all the nodes that I need. It's super helpful. It sends me down the good route. I would say, especially if the script is not too complicated. If I ask for something relatively commonplace and simple. But the moment that I ask for something a bit more off the beaten paths or a bit more complex, sometimes it's just hallucinate. It tells me to use nodes that don't even exist, right? So that's a limitation of ChatGPT, right? And yeah, it can really lead you down the wrong path into a rabbit hole where it's hard to get out of. So certainly the ChatGPT is a great tool to help you out, but you need to be aware of the limitations. And I think that you need good basic knowledge of the Revit API in Dynamo. So you can try it out. Sometimes it might give you good information, but I warn you that it has limits. So be careful to how much you should rely on it. With that said, I do use it sometimes. Like this morning, I was playing with it. Some of it gave me good information, but then for other parts, it was completely off mark. It's also possible to generate Python code that you can use inside Dynamo. We'll talk about that in the final session. All right, so I think that's the last part. Then we'll open Dynamo and start playing with it. The Dynamo forums are great. So just Google Dynamo forums. Lots of great information. The Autodesk teams are there and they answer quite quickly. They're very helpful. I've learned a lot from the Dynamo forums. So greatly recommended. Else, or on message boards, the garden, especially for the duration of this series of live events. If you go to our community and ask questions, it's good to include screenshots. I'll make sure to spend even more time than usual and to answer everyone. So yeah, don't hesitate to post on our community. Okay, we'll soon start to open Dynamo and play along with it. Just a few key information that I need to give you. In the Dynamo Space Camp, we'll be using Dynamo version 3.3, and we'll be using Revit 2025.4. So if you don't have Revit 2025, we don't have this version, you will most likely be fine because there are not huge differences, but on certain specific nodes, it's possible that you see a couple of differences. And the scripts that are created in this version, it's not like Revit files. You can use them in older versions of Dynamo or Revit, and it will still work fine unless some nodes are new and don't exist in the old versions. If you're wondering where to know what versions of Dynamo you're using, inside of Dynamo, you can click on About and you will see this info. Okay, almost getting there. So during this series of live events, we have homework and challenges. Of course, they're optional, but I think that experience is the best way to learn. So for each of the 3 sessions, we have one or more homework. And so at the end of this session, I'll give you your homework and I'll give the solution at the beginning of the next session. And we even have one moment where we can take a little break later on, and I'll give you a small challenge you can complete to get started with Dynamo. Finally, my approach to learning Dynamo, I think it's important to learn the key basic features, but my approach is to, as quickly as possible, jump to an actual script, right? I don't think you should learn every single Dynamo feature before you start actually building a script, because I think the way to learn is to actually have a goal in mind and try to reach that goal. That is building a script to automate a boring task. And that's the way I did learn Dynamo. Of course, I spent maybe 1 hour trying to understand the basic features, but then quite quickly I moved to actually building a script. All right, let's get started with Dynamo. So I have my Revit. Can you all see the Revit screen right now? Just making sure you're still not seeing the slides. Yes, good. Okay, so to open Dynamo, you go to the Manage tab right here, and you see this Dynamo right there. So you're gonna click there. So if you have 2 screens and you're watching the session on one screen, you can have Revit and Dynamo on the other one to play along with it. You don't have to. You can just watch and try by yourself later on. So it's up to you. You can try to follow on the other screen or wait later on to do it. Okay, so you have Dynamo that is open. Something that you might notice if you use previous versions of Dynamo, that they remade this home screen to be a bit more fun with the latest scripts that I've been working on, along with the preview image if the script has one. And if you want to know what is the version of Dynamo, you click on Dynamo here with the arrow and you click on About. And you can see right here, it is the version 3.3 of Dynamo, right? So that's the way you can know which version you are using. Okay, and to get started, the first thing that we can do, click on File and click on New and go with Home Workspace. All right, and then you are inside of Dynamo. Maybe for some of you, it's the first time you see this whole interface. So the very first thing that I would recommend doing is that at the bottom left, you can see that it says automatic, right? So what automatic means is that the script automatically runs, right? Which is not good, because if you're building a script, you don't want it to perpetually run. You want it to be manual. And when you select manual, you need to click run to actually run the script. I always set it to manual because I don't want to mess up my model by mistake. I will also recommend, in this case, we have kind of a dummy model open, but when you're building a script, I recommend creating a new Revit file and using that file to play around with the script to ensure that you don't mess up your main model. So if you have a model with 10 people working on it, it's important. Build your Dynamo script on another file and test it out before actually using it on an important model. And by default, when you open Dynamo, the open Revit view will be used as the default Revit model. Okay, now let's see through some other concepts. So I always show, whenever I talk about automation or even about Revit families, this image, which explains the different levels inside of Revit of elements. So category, families, types, and instances. I won't go into much detail. I would assume that most of you are familiar with these concepts, But when inside of Dynamo, these are very important. When you're going to select nodes, you must know exactly what you're talking about. So of course, category can be columns, walls, dimensions. The family can be a loadable family or a system family, depending on the category. It could be round or rectangular columns. The types are mostly user created in Revit, and the instances is every single element. So just keep that in mind. This is an image from the Dynamo primer. So keep in mind that everything we're doing in Dynamo, we're just doing it using visual programming. So nodes that you can see that are a bit more intuitive for the users. But there's always what they call the textual program equivalent. So everything we do in Dynamo, there's an equivalent by typing. So with programming, either with Python or C#. So you can see in this image, this is the visual program and this is the textual program, but it's the exact same thing. Okay, now let's talk about, let's understand the nodes inside of Revit. So a node in Dynamo, what node should I select? Anyway, I'll just pick any of them. This is a node, right? Any of these boxes with inputs and outputs are called nodes in Dynamo. Let me bring another one. And if I go back to the slides, you can see that these are the port in, so the inputs of the node. And on the right sides, you have the output. So something enters the box and gets out of the box with extra information. And to connect the nodes together, it is what you call wire. And each node has a name inside of Dynamo. You can see this one, the name is called select phase, and this one, the name is called sequence. And okay, let me bring a node called number. Let's say I have number 1. I can change this input manually. And you can see there's this arrow. So I can plug this to this output to an input of another node. And when I move the node, you can see that this wire stays connected. So that's a small script, but some people make fun of Dynamo on very large scripts, calling it spaghetti because there are so many wires that it does look like spaghetti sometimes. Okay, that's something we've already discussed. Make sure that you set at the bottom left of your screen the manual mode to ensure that the scripts doesn't continually run. We've also explored how to connect the nodes together. A very important piece of information is that the inputs must match. So for example, if I have a node called category, categories, I guess. Yeah, categories. And here I can select any Revit category. Let's go to walls. And I try to plug it in amount. And I try to run the script. You can see that I get a warning. And the warning is because I tried to use a category output into an amount input. An amount is a number. If you hover your cursor, it tells you what kind of input it is expecting. In this case, it says amount of numbers or letters in this sequence. Default value is 10. So like the output of this node doesn't match the input of this one. So that doesn't work at all. So I should get rid of this. And now, for example, I can use the number 1 into all 3 of these inputs. And if I run it, you can see I get whatever number. But now I have the right inputs for all 3 of them. And typically, most of the time, you'd see that the name of the outputs should match the name of the input. That's not always the case. What is entered as text for the inputs might be different. But generally speaking, it's a pretty good way of understanding if you're using the correct, if nodes can be connected together or not. And you can see that some nodes have multiple inputs. This one has 3 inputs to work, while others, if I bring back my categories node, and I will bring a node called all elements of category, you can see that this one has only a single input, right? So it's important to ensure that you fill up all the information. You can see, for example, that this one is red right now, and the moment that it's connected, it becomes blue, telling me that's all good. The script is ready to run. This node has all the information that it needs. I recommend hovering your cursor a lot in Dynamo to get all the information that you need. For example, you can hover your cursor above the all elements of category. It will tell you the original node name and then the description. For example, get all elements of the specified category from the model. Or if you hover your cursor above an input or output, it also gives you important information. In this case, quite simply, the category. And then it says an element class. So sometimes it gives way more information, but since this is quite simple, it doesn't need to tell you more. It is possible to rename nodes. It is especially helpful if you plan to use a script with other users in the Dynamo player, as we'll learn later on. So if I go back to Dynamo, you can double click on a node, and now you can suddenly change the text and call this Dynamo space camp fun node. This Grammarly thing is quite annoying. So be careful though when you rename nodes because you might confuse users, right? So we don't really know what is this node called anymore. But something to help you out, you can see this blue circle that indicates that the node has been renamed from the original name. So what you can do is, can we reset it? I'm not sure actually. Yeah, well, if you just hover your cursor, you can see the original node name, all elements of category. So that's a way to remember what it was. So while renaming nodes can be helpful in certain cases, especially in the Dynamo player, it can be a bit dangerous sometimes. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so you might see in the slides, these are the old nodes, the gray nodes. But since the 2023 versions, the nodes look much better. They have this slick black look, as you can see here. So if you're seeing tutorials or videos or images of gray nodes, that's because it's Dynamo before the Revit 2023 version. But since then, we are using these black nodes. The black nodes are also bigger than the old nodes. So in some old scripts, if you open the script and it's kind of all jumbled up, and the nodes are on top of one another, it's probably because the nodes are bigger than they used to, and it kind of messed up the visual look of the scripts. Okay, now let's talk about the best way to find the nodes. There are two ways to find the nodes. The first is to have a look at the library out here. You can see you have like math information. For example, you have function, you can have average, ceiling, the minimum value, random values, sum. So it's always good to have a look at all these functions if you're looking for something. You can, for everything that is related to Revit, so interacting with Revit elements, you can go to the Revit dropdown. You can see the list of elements, ceiling. So this node would be used to, so you have to click here to create the node. So this one will be used to create a ceiling in your model, for example. So if you're getting started, it's actually interesting and good to have a look at this menu, just give you kind of a glance of the nodes available. However, personally, when I am working with a script, I don't really use this, to be quite honest. Maybe when I'm exploring, but most of the time when I'm working with a script, I right-click. So you simply right-click like this, and you have the search bar. And I simply type what I'm looking for in the search bar. So select model element. So let's say I want to add this node. I would simply add it right here. I would warn you that depending on what versions of Dynamo you're using, the search mode in Dynamo is notoriously not so good, but it has been improved along the years. But in some older versions, when you search for something, let's say you type select model elements, especially if you have the spaces, sometimes you just don't find what you're looking for. It can be annoying, but in recent version, they've made it better. So that's less an issue than it used to be. But if you're working with an old version of Revit, you might find this issue of having difficulty with search tool. There are packages made by users. In this case, Rhythm, one of my favorite, made by John Pearson, that gives you access to extra nodes that are not in the default Dynamo. This is super helpful, but we'll talk more about it later. Elizabeth asked, I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. Can you tag or make nodes a favorite if you use them frequently? I have no idea. That's such a good question. I don't think you can, honestly. Maybe you can. So if someone knows what the answer is, I'll make some research after the session to know, but I don't think so. The answer is I don't think so. Okay, now let's talk about key nodes that you'll be using in your scripts. These are the input nodes. So that is information that you use as input for other nodes. So you have, these are the key ones. You have the number, the integer, the Boolean. Boolean means yes or no, or true and false, or 0 and 1. A string, and that's very important in the programming jargon, a string means text, a piece of text. However, you can have a number as a string, right? So that's sometimes confusing. For example, in Revit, the mark of elements is not a number, it is a string because it can include letters. So the moment you can include letters, it means it's not a number, it's a string. So very important to understand the differences. And then you have the number node. In this case, we have the slider. In this case, this is just a number node where you enter the value. And then we have the file path and directory path if you want to bring files or folders to your Dynamo workplace. It is possible to create nodes. I never remember what is the shortcut. Control W. Let's try that out. So it's very kind when you're working with Dynamo and you know some users might be using your script to leave some notes, right? If it's a very simple script, it's not always necessary. But if you hit Control W, you can see I have a new note here. And then be careful when using category Windows because blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then you can leave these notes in your script just to give extra information. Or maybe it's not only for the others. Sometimes I like to leave notes for myself. If I reuse a script, like often happens, 3 years after I originally created it, sometimes I forget a lot of stuff. So this note can help you out to give some information. Again, it depends, kind of depends on the complexity of the script, and it's not always necessary. Now let's talk about group. This is very important. I love groups. You can group nodes together to keep your script more organized and easier to understand, and the scripts can have extra information, even notes included. So for example, let's say that I want to group these 3 elements together. So 2 nodes and 1 text node. I will select all 3, go to groups and click on create group. And this one, it's very good, very important that you give a very descriptive name of what this is doing. For example, I could call this select all elements of category. And they've added, I don't remember what year they've added that. You can even add an extra description here. This will pick all, so okay, whatever. And you can see then when I move this this group, all the nodes and the nodes will be moved at the same time. And if I move one of the node, you can see that the boundaries of this group will be adjusted to be larger and bigger. Okay, and now if I right click on this group, something I recommend as well, you can set a color. So firms have their own color codes often. So you can switch to having this kind of lime green. Something you can do if you're not sure what color you should be using, if you have group style, you can use the default ones recommended. For example, these would be inputs, right? So the first part of the script is typically the inputs, and later on you can have the outputs. And if you have some action, for example, I could group these 2 nodes together, call it generate sequence, and this is an action part of the script, so I right click and set it to action like this. But that's the default color scheme. You can use your own, but if you're not sure, using the one recommended by Dynamo can be a good way of doing it. There's a question about the Dynamo versions in the chat. Of course, as mentioned, the Dynamo version is linked to the Revit version, right? So since you open Dynamo from Revit, That's the version it will be using. I think it's possible to install other versions of Dynamo if you go on their website. I'll admit I'm not fully sure of how that works. I think it's mostly for beta testing. I've never done it. I just use the version provided by default with the Revit install. Okay, so we did that. We've created groups. We've set a color code. And yeah, you can drag and drop elements. In this case, for example, we've drag and dropped the node to the group to give extra information. So Control W, numbers, and I can drag and drop in the group so this information remains there. Again, the idea is to keep your groups well organized and well detailed. Okay, there's a feature that is called freeze. And what this does is when you run the script, the node is going to be ignored. So this is something that I use a lot when working with scripts. If there's a part of script that I don't want to run, for example, if I have a node that deletes elements, but my script is not final, so I don't want to delete elements inside of my Revit model, I can select a node, right-click on it, and select freeze. And you can see that it has this kind of this snow icon, and the nodes become kind of blued out. Like anyway, it has less opacity and seems slightly blue. That means the node is not active. If you're on the script, it will just be ignored, and everything. That means that all the outputs, the nodes after this part of the script, won't work as well. Alex B asks, "Can you freeze a group?" Such a great question. I'm not even sure. I don't think so. So right-clicking and no, I don't think so. That would be a good idea, though. Let's ask the Dynamo team. Okay, so something we explore already, searching versus browsing. Searching is the best way. Browsing is nice if you want to explore, though, and to understand Dynamo a bit more. Okay, now so we've explored some of these nodes. Let's go back to the inputs. And we'll bring back some of them. We have the string, the number, and the slider. And I will show you the differences between all three. So if I right-click and I type string, I have the string node. Again, that's a piece of text. So I can type in something like this, and you can include numbers. Or you could have a string that is only numbers, but in form of text. If you know, so you cannot do math with this number. You cannot multiply it because Revit and Dynamo consider them to be text. Then number and integer slider. Okay, so now let's bring the number. Oh, we already did. You can see this one as digits. If you want an integer, so a number that doesn't have any digits, there's no node that is only an integer, but you can bring on the slider. And the slider, if you click on this arrow, you can have a minimum and a maximum value and a step. So if I change the step to 5, you can see that if I play with this kind of slider element, it goes by step of 5 only. Then this is the output of this integer slider. You can put it anywhere. Okay, let's talk about the code block. This one is super helpful. I would say it's the universal node. I use it in all of my scripts almost. You can do anything with these nodes. You can enter a short code. You can create a string. You can create a number. And you can enter. You can have multiple values within the same code block. You just need to separate them with a semicolon. And the number of inputs and outputs depends on how much information you have on the code block itself. The limitation, though, of this is it cannot be used in the Dynamo player. You cannot customize the values in the Dynamo player for the users. So anytime I have a script where I want a value to be customized, for example, let's say that I have a script that lets the user change the wall top offset, and I want them to be able to use it in Dynamo player, which we're going to explore later, I wouldn't use a code block for this value. I would use a number node instead, right? But let me show you what you can do with the code block. So again, I double click and there it says enter code, but you can just enter values. You don't have to enter actual code. So if you use a quotation mark like this, you can enter text, hello, and then you have a semicolon. If you type enter, you'll have a new line where you can type another kind of value. So here we have a string value. Again, string means text. If I just type in a number, you can see it is blue. When it is blue, it means it's an actual number, not just a string. If I was to add quotation mark, you can see that it becomes orange, which means it is a string. Right? And you can even do kind of simple equation. Let's say that I do x plus 10. So that's kind of an equation, algebra almost. And if I was to place a number here, and let's say the number is 10, and I plug it here, the result of the third line would be 10 plus 10, which means 20. So if I run the script, you can see that the result of this is 20. So code block are pretty universal. You can use them for a lot of stuff, but they cannot be used in the Dynamo player. Sliders, we've already played with them a little bit. Okay, now let's talk about the watch nodes. If you want to have a look at the results of what your nodes are producing, it's good to bring in a watch node. So I just search for watch, and I can plug it. Let's say that I can create a watch node for all three of these outputs. You can always copy and paste nodes, by the way. So if I run it, you can see here, well, the result is just whatever was typed in there, right? So this one is hello. It's orange because it's a string value, so a text. This one is the same number I've typed. And this one is 20 because we had an equation, remember? So x plus 10. In this case, we've set the number 10 as the input. If I was to change this to 15 and run it again, you can see now it is 25. So that's the code block, pretty powerful. So each line is essentially a different output. Yes, it is, exactly. Herman asked, what's the shortcut you use to duplicate a watch node? Copy and paste, so Control C and Control V, like this. So you just need to kind of get rid of the wires and connect to the correct one. Lines of code of a code block are not connected, correct? Yes, they're not connected, but don't forget to put that semicolon. Okay, so we've done enough explaining the basic principles of Dynamo. Now we are ready to create our first script, and it is generating a sequence. And so if you're wondering what's the point of this, are we doing math or we're playing with Revit? So we'll bring the Revit part afterwards, and I swear that this is going to be helpful in Revit later. But for now, we're going to do a bit of math. So this is a node that I've already brought to Revit, and it's called the sequence node. And the sequence node, it creates a series of number based on the different inputs that I've added. So do I have... Yeah, okay, so let's create a new sequence node. I will select this one, copy and paste it. And now it is still frozen. So I will right click and unfreeze it. And now I have 3 inputs to fill. All of them are numbers, although I think the start can be a string as well. So there are a couple of ways you could play with this. So the first one would be to, again, I simply double click and I create a code block. And you can type in number. Remember, if it's number, you don't need quotation mark. So I have 15, 20, semicolon, and the step, let's say 2, semicolon as well. And I can see it creates 3 arrows, 3 outputs. And I can simply plug them in like this. Right? And by the way, you can use, you could use the same output for multiple inputs. So for example, I could use the number 2 for both the step and the amount. You don't need to create another number 2. You can use the same in different inputs. But let's say that I still build it like this, and I run the script. So when you run the script and you want to know the result, 2 ways you can do it if you want to see what happened. The first is to use a watch node. So I will place the watch node and connect it to a list. Let's run it again. You can see that I have a list of elements, right? Going from 15 to 53. So the other thing that you can do as well, if you don't feel like placing a watch node, you can hover your cursor where it says auto here. And here you can see the list and click on the pin icon. and the list will remain open, and you can scroll down with the wheel to see the complete list of number. But this one, you cannot resize it, if I'm not mistaken. While this one, the watch node, you can make it bigger, as big as you want. So that's the difference. The watch node is a bit more easy to customize. While if you hover a cursor like this, it's a bit more difficult. So let's change the values a little bit. Let's say I start with 10. I want 25 numbers, and we'll change the step to 1. You can see that my list of numbers is different now, just following the rules that I've entered here in the code block. Okay, now something interesting is actually this sequence node. First, you can use different inputs. You don't have to use the code block only. For example, I could use the integer for the amount. So I have the integer slider, and you can use a slider. You can just type in the value right there. So I will place it like this. And the start, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to use a string node. Just remember a string or a piece of text. I will type in A and plug it here and start. And you can see it creates a list of letters in alphabetical order, right? So if I was to change the amount to 20, there we go. So Brian says it is like Revit. There are 8 different ways to do one task. Kind of, yes. It depends. Some tasks in Dynamo, there might be not a lot of routes to do it. But yeah, I wanted to show the different ways, the code block, the integer, the string to enter into the inputs. The thing is, the code block is kind of a universal input creator, but sometimes it's a good idea to use it, but sometimes it's not. Oh, that's something that we saw. You can hover a cursor. Yeah, that's something that we did. We've created a sequence that includes text instead of numbers. So I see that we're almost 11. We're going to take a very short break of about 3 minutes. So you can take a break, or you can do this challenge. So that's the first challenge. I want you to generate a list of 19 elements between 100 to 190. Use increments of 5 between each value, and the number of elements can be adjusted by the users. So I've gave a hint of if the number of elements can be adjusted by the users. That means the code block will not work in this case because it cannot be used in the Dynamo player. So that's my first little challenge. I'll give you 3 minutes. So I'll come back here, take a quick break, and be back at 11:01. So I'll just close my cam meanwhile and be back very soon. All right, we're back. So how many of you managed to complete this little challenge? Do we have some of you? I think we've got Brian who managed to do it. If you just took a break, that's fine as well. You can try it after a session. I only got coffee. That's all good. I'll show you exactly how to do it. Okay, so generate a list of 19 elements between 100 and 290. Use increments of 5 between each value, and number of elements can be adjusted by the users. So let's go to Dynamo. You know what? Let's create a new script because that's starting to get kind of messy. Oh, we got people pasting screenshots. They got it. That's great. And yes, Isham pretty much got it. So create a sequence node. And then you can use, you have a few options. You can use the number. You could use an integer slider. Both of them would work, but don't use the code block because the code block could be used as an input in the Dynamo player. So in this case, maybe I'll use the integer slider, although the number will work as well, but I like using integers so we don't have digits. We have a few people sharing the results. Pretty good, pretty good. So integer, I will place that in start. At what number did we start? At 100. So integer starts at 100, and we want 19 numbers, so that's the amount, and the step, so that's the distance between each number is going to be 5. You can see that I forgot to set my script to manual, so it's constantly running. You can see the list of number, and the moment that I change a value here, it's automatically updated. So which can be good if you're just doing numbers, but I really don't like this mode personally. I really like to prefer to leave it to manual. So congrats to everyone who managed to make this script work. Okay, now we're going to explore a bit of theory, right? You can see that's the way I like to teach. I want to do practical stuff and then explain some theory behind it. But it's very important that you understand what is an item and what is a list. So the list is, in this case, includes every single element in this case. The best comparison that I've heard about that is you have a hand. My hand is the list, and each finger is an item, right? So yeah, and if you go back to Dynamo, you can see this is the list, and this list includes 16 elements. So if you want to know how many elements or how many items are included in the list, have a look at the bottom right, and this number is indicated. Something a bit funky, and that's a programming thing, is that the list always starts at item number 0. So it means if you have a list of 10 elements, the final element, so the 10 elements is actually going to be number 9, sorry. So in this case, we have a list of 16 elements, but you can see that the list only goes to 15. But that's because we have a number 0. So the first one is number 0, 100. So that's a big source of confusion that I've seen people that start with Dynamo when they're confused about the amount of elements in the list. So make sure that you always have a look at this number here between these kind of what are these called, curly brackets, that tells you how many elements you have in your list. Okay, now let's start to do some more curly bracket or braces. Let's modify the Revit elements. So we've already alluded to it earlier by placing the categories node and the node called all elements of category. So that's the easiest way that you can select every single elements of a specific category in your Revit model. So if I return to my Revit file that is currently open, you can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 doors. So if I want to select all of these doors, I will place a new node first called categories. And this is a drop-down node, so I can find doors. I can press D to make it easier. I have doors, and then I can create another that says all elements of category. And plug the doors category to all elements of category. And now check this out. I will run the script, and that's when it starts to get interesting. These elements are Revit elements. So how can you know if it's just a number or string versus Revit elements? It's a Revit element because you have this number, right? So first, this is the type. It displays the type name. And then afterwards, this number with the green rectangle is the unique ID of the element. And let me just make this smaller. If you click, something interesting, if you click on one of these green text, let's say I click here, it will highlight the specific door. You can see that the Revit window, the view, is changed and centered on this specific element. And if you're wondering what is this number, it is where is it? Section ID. In what tab? Under Manage. It's under Manage. Yeah, I guess I don't use it that often. Yeah, there you go. Select by ID. Manage. Okay. Okay, there you go. I guess I don't use it often enough. So in the Manage tab, you have ID of selection. I have doors selected. If I click on IDs of selection, this is the unique ID number of that door. So that's a unique number that is different from the mark value in Revit that gives you what is the unique ID of the selection. So this is always unique, unlike marks, which you can have the same mark for multiple elements, even though if it gives you a warning, but it's still possible. But this is truly unique. And it is the same number as what you'll see in Dynamo in there, if you're wondering where that is from. So if you have results in Dynamo with this green rectangle, you know that's a piece of an element in Revit. Okay, let's bring in another node and start messing around with these Revit elements. The node that I use the most often is called element set parameter by name. So let's bring it. Let's maximize the script again. How is it called again? You have to search it. Set parameter by name. All right. So get used to this one because you'll be using it a lot. Set parameter by name. So you can see we require 3 inputs, the elements, the parameter name, and the value. So you can see elements. Those can be plugged together, right? So I will plug the elements into here. Now the parameter name, I can find any parameter. In this case, it needs to be instance for this specific way to work. So which parameter should I use? Maybe I should start with the sill height. So I will specify that this is for the sill height parameter. 2 ways to do it. I can have a string node, or if I'm lazy, I can just double click and type sill height in between quotation mark and plug it in for the parameter name. And finally, the value. Assuming that I want the same value for all of them. Again, let's say I'm lazy and I want to keep the code block. I will type in minus 150. That's kind of bad. Let's put 100, not a minus. Okay, is everything set, ready? I'm ready to use the script. So just to verify again, you can see currently this door right now, the sill height is 0. And if I run the script now, I try again, you can see that the sill height is 100. Right, and all doors, in fact, are 100. Let me hit Control Z because, yeah, and by the way, you can see that these lines appear. That's because we see the bottom of the wall now. So let's hit Control Z. And I'll try something else. Ken Burke asked if the recording will be uploaded to the site as usual. Yes, it will. You will receive the link this afternoon, at least afternoon here, Eastern Time. Okay, so our script did work, but I do want to give you a few hints if you have warnings. If you have a warning like this, it's probably because you have bad outputs. Let me give you an example. If you are to enter something like this, well, you have a mistake, but if you try to run it, it doesn't work because the parameter name expects a string. So make sure that you use the quotation mark if you want to use a text like this. Or same thing, if I was to put this number in between quotation mark and run the script again, it's a mistake because Dynamo is expecting a number and you gave a string value, so a text value to it. So it doesn't quite work. So make sure that you're using the right values. And if you hover your cursor, it says the value. Of course, it matches the parameter name. So in some cases, for example, I could use the comments parameter name. In this case, it would work because the comments is a string parameter. And now if I return to Revit and I select this door, you can see in the comments, it says 100. But it's 100 in a string number. So this is like text because I can enter letters and it works. Another way to work with Revit instead, let's say that you don't want to have all doors, you only want to have selected doors. Something that you can do instead is use the Select Model Elements node. So I will bring it Select Model Elements. And so I will just unplug this. And, and now in this case, I click on select. I go back to Revit, and let's say that I select this stuff. And now I plug it in. You can see again the elements. These are the unique IDs like we've shown earlier. And let's run the script again. Let's just change the value. You can see though, so two things that happen here. There's a warning on this node. It says no parameter found by that name. So what is the problem here? The problem here is that when we did the selection, we not only selected the doors, but also the tags. And the tags, they don't have a comments parameter, right? So Dynamo tried to put a value to the comments parameter of tags, but they don't have one because we did select not only rooms, doors, but also tags. But if I look at my doors, it still worked. You can see that comment says script works for these doors. So in this case, to solve this issue that the script is trying to work on some elements where they shouldn't, because that's something that we've already solved. Let me go forward a little bit. We need to add some filtering. So that's what we'll be covering for next few minutes, how to filter and to remove everything that is not a door. So let me just put this information on the left side. And the best way to filter, if I return to Dynamo, just give me a sec here. So the first, I need to get the category of the elements I am selecting. So the name of the node is element get category. So if I plug the elements of the get category and I run the script, I can see that I have, these are the categories of the selected elements. You can see I have doors and door tags. In this case, I only want to keep the doors and get rid of the door tags, right? So next, I will place an equal node. So basically, this is a mat node that compares two inputs and lets you know if they are the same or not. In this case, I will bring in, I can create a string that I will call doors, plug it in. And so I'll purposefully do it in the wrong way so you can see what's wrong here. So this is not working. It says false. So the problem that we have is that this is a category and this is a string, two different types of outputs. So we need to convert this element to a string, but there's a node that is called category name, and that converts the category to a string value, which will match this output of the doors. And then I can place it here. If I run the script, you can see that when it says true, it means that indeed it is a door. And when it's false, it means this is not a door. So let me bring you one of my favorite nodes. It is called filter by bool mask. And this lets you only keep elements that are true, for example. Okay, so let's search for it. Filter by bool mask. You'll be using this one a lot. It's very helpful. So in this case, the mask is the bool output. So the true or false. And the list is the list of doors that we've initially selected. And what this does, it creates a list, and everything that is in is a door, and everything that is out is not a door. So using all of these nodes, we've successfully filtered out everything that is not a door in my selection to ensure that my set parameter name by name node doesn't bug. Okay, and if I try it again, let's say that I change the parameter name to sill height again, and I change this to 125 value, and I run my script, you can see that it says it has a warning though. Oh yeah, you can see that I forgot to update this input. So I will just use the in node, And now this doesn't have a warning anymore because we've filtered out all of the tags. So this doesn't only filter out the tags, but every element that is not a door. So if I select the whole thing and run it again, yeah, there you go. It still works because all the other elements are filtered out. There's a couple of questions about filtering. I just want to finish a couple of points and then I'll keep a few more minutes at the end to explain them. Okay, I want to introduce, I've alluded to it earlier, the concept of custom packages. Custom packages are nodes made by users. One of my favorite package is called Rhythm, and it has a node that does everything we've just did, but in a single node instead of having to use these equal nodes or filter by bool mask. In this case, it's called element filter by category. But to be able to use it, I must first add this package. I can see in the add-ons, I cannot see Rhythm here right now. So I must first add it to my list. So I'll go to the package here, go to the package manager, and search for Rhythm. I can see Rhythm is here. If you want to make sure it's the right one and just not a random package, you can look at the number of downloads. This one is 420,000 downloads, which indicates to me it's probably the right one because it's quite popular and this is a well-known popular package by John Pearson. So we'll click here to install, click on OK. It says blah, blah, blah. It has dependents. You can click on OK again. It says it might not work in this version of Dynamo, whatever. I hope I didn't crash my Dynamo. Okay. Now let's return to Dynamo. I can see my Rhythm. And now I will bring the node that I've mentioned that is called filter by category. Element filter by category. Element filter by category. It's right here. And the way that you can know it is a custom package, a node from a custom package, you can see this little metronome icon. That's because it is a node from this package. And even in the node itself, you can see this image, and it even says Rhythm. So that's a way to know it's from a custom package. So the problem with these is that if you need to install the package first before the script will work. If you send this to a teammate, if they don't have the Rhythm package installed, the script will bug, it will not work. So that's a very important thing to know about custom packages. But if we want to recreate everything that we did here, let me just freeze that node. For example, I could bring my selection of elements. I plug in the elements. And yeah, okay, I can use the string. So we'll just copy and paste this, plug in the category. And then you just have the filter method. In this case, it just means equal. You can have starts with, does not contain, and so on. In this case, I would simply create a code block and type equals in quotation mark and put it there. And you can see what's nice about this is that it only keeps the door. And now I can use the rest of my script without having all these nodes required. Yeah, so let's unfreeze this. And it works. So you can see that with this custom node, I was able to simplify my script by getting rid of these. But again, maybe I would prefer this because it reduces the chances that of mistakes and errors because other users might not have the Rhythm package installed. So it depends if you're only using the script by yourself for BIM management job. This is fine. If you want to deploy it to your team, this might be a limitation, or at least you need to ask all users to install it. People are asking, it will prompt them to install it though, want it. The thing is not really. If you do open Dynamo directly, you have an extension here called the, which is a graph node manager. No, not this one. Yeah, okay, workspace references. And you can see here the list of custom packages. Oh, I guess they're not there. But whenever you're using a custom package, they appear here, and you will prompt it to install them. The thing is, if you're using the Dynamo player, you will not see this warning. So it's just kind of an extra thing to think about when you build your scripts. Okay, so these are things that we've already explored about the custom packages. Again, have a look at the icon if you want to know if it's a custom package or not. Here are my favorite custom packages that I use most often. Rhythm and Monocle by John Pearson. Anyway, I won't go too far into them. What about downloading Clockwork? Yeah, Rosanna is asking that. It's in my list of favorite packages, indeed. So if you want to install Clockwork, for example, I will go here in Package Manager, type in Clockwork. You can see Clockwork for Dynamo 2.x. I guess we're now at Dynamo 3 point something, but I guess it will most likely still work. You can see all of the version of this package. By default, it will install you the latest one. So I can click here to install this one. I see there's a couple of questions. I will just have a few more things to finish and then I'll move on to the questions. Okay, so final disclaimer about the packages. They can be a bit controversial. They can be a bit hard to manage. They can bug in different versions of Revit. If a user hasn't installed a custom package, the script might not work. And some packages, they get discontinued. So the user gets bored and they stop updating them. But of course, we cannot blame them. Like they're typically not paid to build these packages. It's kind of a hobby. So of course, we cannot expect the users to keep updating them forever. And something that I do in some of my scripts, for example, is to convert them to Python code. So if I'm using a node from a package, I'm working with a programmer these days. So I might ask, hey, can you convert this node into Python script just to ensure I don't have any weird dependencies on my script? So overall, custom nodes, they're great to get started. I use them all of the time. If you're a solo user, if it's for your BIM management work, for full deployment, they can work, but you can also consider alternatives. And you can see if you open a script where a custom package is not installed, you will be prompted to install it. And you can click in the workspace reference on the left, on the right, and install the specified version. Okay, I see we have a few more information. So the final thing that I want to talk about this session, I see we have 5 minutes. I'll try to finish this point and then I'll move on to the questions, is using the Dynamo player. So that's something that I've talked about a couple of times during this session. So first, let me kind of try to clean out some of this stuff because there's too much of it. So I will just get rid of this. Okay, let's say this is my script and I want to I want to change the sill height value of the doors to 125. All right, so first thing I need to set the inputs. So I will right click this node, select model elements, and click is input. And if I want to change the categories, I could also set this to is input. But if I only want to have doors all of the time, I don't have to do so. So again, you cannot set a code block to is input. That's one limitation. So let's say that this script is correct for now. So the next thing that I will do is to show, is it the documentation? No, that's not it. Graph properties. So I can go to graph properties and I can write some information. So this change the information, the sill height of doors to 125. I can type in the other name. So let's say this is BIMpure. You can even have an URL. If you have a website with more information about the script, you can type it in. And I really like to include an image. I use a little tool called Snagit where I can quickly create a screenshot. So I'll quickly do something. So I take a screenshot of this and let's say that I add a little arrow. So this is quite cheap, but I want to quickly show you how that is done. And then if I go back to Dynamo, I can now select the image I've just created. This one. So this will show up as the preview. And that's it. I will simply save the script. and place it in the Dynamo Bootcamp, the Space Camp, sorry. So test Space Camp, I'll create a new folder, try to give a good name to the script. So Space Camp, doors, sill height. And now I move to, we'll just shut this down. Go to Revit, go to the Manage tab, go to the Dynamo player. Oh, what the hell is that? Yeah, sometimes it's a bit slow to open. And here's my Dynamo player. And now here, if you're using this version of Revit, the Dynamo player changed within a few different versions of Revit, but I can add a new folder. So I will simply pick the folder where I've placed the script. So it is in the Dynamo Space Camp folder here, test Space Camp. Click on OK. And here I can select the correct folder called test Space Camp. And now you can see the script that appears in the Dynamo player. So you can set this up for your users if they can use the script without having to open Dynamo directly. So, and you can see the preview image. So that's why I like to include the preview image. It's a bit more descriptive and a bit more user-friendly. So now I recommend clicking on this so I can see all the information about the script. And now I only have a single thing that I can do inside of it. If you have multiple inputs, you can change the values in there. But let's say that I place a couple of new doors. And you can see these ones, right now, their sill height is 0. So let's select a bunch of elements like this. And now I run the script. It says it's still running, run complete, no mistake. And you can see that these doors, the sill height has been modified to be 125. Like the value of 125 could have been an input if you wanted to customize this inside of the Dynamo player. But for now, we've only allowed this input to be usable. Okay, the rest was how to prepare for the Dynamo player. And yeah, that's going to be it for today. We're right on time. There was a couple more things that I want to discuss, but I'll respect the time and can mention it in the next session. I have some homework for you. And yeah, it is to create a script to modify the selected wall top offset value to minus 150 millimeters. If you prefer using imperial units, that's fine. So that's minus 6 inches. So extremely similar to the script that we've just built for the door sill height, but this time it is for the walls. So yeah, that's your homework until Wednesday. Of course, I'm not forcing you to do so, but if you really want to learn Dynamo, you need to try it out by yourself. You cannot just watch me do stuff on the screen. Brian asked if this recording will be made immediately available. Not immediately. I still need to upload it manually to the portal. So I would say in the next 2 hours for sure. It shouldn't be too long. Go on the message board on the Guardians community, and I'll post there when it is ready. Yeah, so that's your homework. And I will stop the recording